Back in the day, the Hells Angels and the Rudo crime family essentially controlled the streets. They formed an alliance and dominated everything from drug trafficking and extortion to money laundering. But, as is often the case with criminal partnerships, it didn't last. Greed, betrayal, and increasing pressure from law enforcement turned their cooperation into a violent conflict, sparking a turf war that would forever change Montreal's criminal underworld. By the 1980s, Vito Rudo had taken control of Montreal's Mafia. He was different from the old-school bosses who preferred to keep operations strictly within the family. Vito was a modern gangster who believed in collaboration over conflict. One of his key allies was the Hells Angels. No longer just a rowdy biker gang, the Hells Angels had evolved into a powerful criminal enterprise, running an extensive drug network dealing in cocaine and methamphetamine. The Rudo family brought in product through connections with South American cartels, while the Hells Angels handled street-level distribution. Together, they built one of the largest and wealthiest drug empires in Canadian history, stretching their influence from Montreal to Toronto and beyond. But they weren't the only players. The Rock Machine Motorcycle Club refused to be overshadowed and openly challenged the Hells Angels, igniting one of the bloodiest biker wars in history, the Quebec Biker War. From 1994 to 2002, more than 160 people were killed, including innocent bystanders and police officers. The Rudo family supported the Hells Angels with funding and contacts, helping them overpower the Rock Machine. Eventually, the Hells Angels emerged victorious and seized control of Quebec's drug trade. However, the extreme violence also attracted serious attention from law enforcement. With the Rock Machine eliminated, the Hells Angels and the Rudo family held a firm grip on power. The Mafia managed the international supply lines, bringing in cocaine from South America and heroin from Europe, while the Hells Angels handled local distribution, collections, and enforcement. Their operation functioned like a corporation, complete with logistics managers, money laundering through legitimate businesses, and swift, often violent conflict resolution. They made millions, but their success didn't go unnoticed. In 2006, the RCMP and other law enforcement agencies launched a massive crackdown called Operation Colisée. Dozens of top mafia figures were arrested, including Vito Rudo himself. He was later extradited to the United States for his role in a 1981 triple homicide in New York. With Vito in prison, the alliance between the Hells Angels and the Mafia, other associates, were gunned down in the streets. By the time Vito was released in 2012, the empire he had built was in ruins. His key allies were dead. The Hells Angels had grown more autonomous, and new gangs were rising to fill the power vacuum. Vito tried to rebuild, but in 2013, he died unexpectedly, officially of natural causes, though many believe he was poisoned. Without Vito, the Rudo crime family collapsed, and a brutal power struggle erupted in Montreal's underworld. The Hells Angels, remaining mafia elements, and emerging street gangs have all fought for control. However, law enforcement is now watching more closely than ever and working aggressively to dismantle what remains. Meanwhile, on the U.S. East Coast, another deadly alliance was forming between the Pagan's Motorcycle Club and the Philadelphia Mafia. These two organizations are among the most feared names in organized crime across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. The Pagans originated in Maryland in 1959 and developed a fearsome reputation by the 1970s. Unlike the Hells Angels, they never expanded globally. They kept their operations local, but deadly. The Philadelphia Mob, also known as the Bruno Scarfo family, maintained a stronghold over loan sharking, gambling, drug trafficking, and extortion. Traditionally, mafia bosses kept their distance from biker gangs, but not this time. The Pagans and the Philadelphia Mob recognized the strategic advantages of working together. Their partnership was secretive but deadly. The mob provided the financial backing, while the Pagans supplied the muscle. When bars or clubs refused to pay protection money, it was the Pagans who handled enforcement. That enforcement was brutal. Beatings, arson, threats. They were known for taking things to extremes. Their violent, unpredictable nature made them ideal enforcers, capable of carrying out the mob's threats without drawing immediate law enforcement attention. By the 1990s and early 2000s, police began to notice a pattern. The Pagans were increasingly involved in violent attacks tied to the Philadelphia Mob. Business owners who refused to pay were targeted. Bars were set on fire. Cars were destroyed, and some individuals ended up hospitalized. At the same time, the Pagans had a strong foothold in the methamphetamine trade, manufacturing and distributing large quantities throughout the region. The partnership generated massive profits for both groups, but also attracted increased scrutiny. This wasn't your typical neighborhood biker gang or small-time criminal ring. Together, the Pagans and the Philly Mob built one of the most dangerous and lucrative drug operations on the East Coast. The mob used its connections to South American coke. The drug money was laundered through a range of front businesses, strip clubs, nightclubs, car dealerships, all controlled by the mob. The Pagans had their own network of fronts, including biker bars, tattoo parlors, and other cash-heavy establishments to disguise their earnings. For a while, this kept both groups under the radar, but, as with many criminal alliances, tensions began to rise. Disputes over drug money, unpaid debts, and personal conflicts sometimes turned violent. There were even reports of Pagans stealing from mob shipments, which led to severe retaliation, including beatings and suspected murders. One of the most significant betrayals came in the 2000s when several high-ranking Pagan members turned informant. Their testimonies exposed everything: drug trafficking, extortion, murder plots, and the deep level of coordination between the Pagans and the mob. By the late 2000s, federal authorities had gathered enough evidence to launch major prosecutions. RICO cases were filed, targeting both organizations. In 2001, a major bust led to the arrest of 73 Pagan members, revealing the depth of their ties to the Philadelphia Mafia. Meanwhile, the Philly Mob, already weakened by internal conflict and previous informants, suffered another major blow. In 2011, the Pagans took another hit when their national vice president, Floyd Jesse Moore, became a federal informant. His cooperation triggered a wave of convictions. Some members fled, others went underground, and several cooperated with law enforcement. Despite this, neither group disappeared. The Pagans quietly regrouped, becoming more cautious and less visible, but they remained active. The Philadelphia Mob, now under the leadership of Joey Merlino, still exists, though it is no longer the powerful force it once was. Their once powerful alliance has mostly dissolved. Still, in the world of organized crime, history has a way of repeating itself. If the conditions are right, a new generation could very well revive the same kind of partnership. For now, what's left is a violent legacy, a reminder of how dangerous and profitable things can become when outlaw bikers and organized crime families join forces. And it's not limited to Philadelphia. Similar biker mafia alliances exist around the world. Outlaw motorcycle clubs, OMCs, and traditional mafia organizations have long been involved in drug and weapons trafficking, extortion, and contract killings. The DEA, FBI, and ATF have spent decades trying to dismantle these networks, launching some of the largest undercover operations in law enforcement history. One of the most well-known undercover operations was Operation Black Biscuit, which targeted the Hells Angels in Arizona. Federal agents infiltrated the group by posing as members of a smaller biker gang called Outlaws MC, which had connections to the Hells Angels. One agent, J. Dobbins, known by the alias J. Bird, spent 2 years undercover. During that time, he staged crimes, faked murders, and arranged illegal weapons deals to earn the gang's trust. The operation produced hours of hidden camera footage, wiretaps, and detailed intelligence that exposed the inner workings of the Hells Angels. In 2003, over 50 members and associates were arrested on charges including racketeering, weapons trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. The Arizona chapter suffered a significant blow, and the operation demonstrated just how far law enforcement was willing to go to dismantle outlaw motorcycle gangs. Meanwhile, the Philadelphia Mafia continued to face pressure. In 2012, the DEA launched Operation Trojan Horse, a sting focused on the Philly mob's connections to outlaw biker gangs. Undercover agents posed as drug dealers and recorded meetings between senior members of the Pagan's motorcycle club and Philadelphia Mafia leaders. These recordings exposed planned drug and firearms deals and confirmed that the Pagans were acting as the mob's enforcers, collecting debts and carrying out assaults. By 2013, more than 30 individuals from both organizations were arrested, including Philadelphia underboss Joseph "Mousy" Massimino and several of the Pagans' top enforcers. The operation significantly disrupted their criminal infrastructure. However, this biker mafia collaboration is not limited to North America. It has spread globally. In Spain, the Hells Angels allied with local mafia networks to run massive cocaine and hashish smuggling operations across Europe, South America, and North Africa. In 2010, Operation Shovel exposed their activities. Undercover agents recorded meetings where Hells Angels leaders negotiated with cartel representatives and mafia figures. The operation led to over 30 arrests, and authorities seized millions in assets, more than 500 kilograms of cocaine, luxury vehicles, weapons, and cash. In Brazil, the Bandidos Motorcycle Club partnered with Italy's 'Ndrangheta Mafia to traffic drugs and firearms between continents. Operation Cavaleiros do Asfalto, Knights of the Asphalt, tracked cocaine shipments from Brazilian cartels to European streets, with the Bandidos managing distribution and the Mafia handling money laundering. In 2018, coordinated raids in Brazil and Italy resulted in the arrest of over 40 members and the seizure of substantial quantities of drugs, weapons, and currency. The operation revealed the immense scale and threat posed by these international criminal alliances. One of the earliest and most ambitious crackdowns on outlaw biker gangs in the U.S. was Operation Rough Rider, launched by the DEA in the 1980s. Unlike later operations that focused on specific groups, Rough Rider undercover agents infiltrated these networks by posing as buyers of narcotics and illegal weapons. What they uncovered went far beyond drugs. Investigations revealed a volatile underworld of internal conflicts, revenge killings, and assassination plots between rival factions. When the operation concluded in 1987, it had led to over 130 arrests nationwide and the seizure of millions of dollars in narcotics, cash, and weapons. It marked the largest biker-related drug bust in U.S. history and significantly disrupted motorcycle club operations across the country. Despite these massive takedowns, outlaw biker gangs and their ties to organized crime have endured. Rather than disappear, they adapted. Operations like Rough Rider, Black Biscuit, and Trojan Horse expose the extent of the cooperation between outlaw motorcycle clubs, traditional mafia families, and global drug cartels. And while law enforcement succeeded in capturing many high-ranking figures, both sides of the biker mafia alliance learned and evolved from the crackdowns. New faces, new tactics, and tighter operational control followed in the wake of federal crackdowns. The message was clear: as long as there is money to be made through drugs, weapons, and extortion, outlaw motorcycle clubs and organized crime syndicates will find ways to collaborate. And the DEA remains vigilant. Now, let's turn back the clock to one of the most feared figures in Hells Angels history, Michael Irish O'Farrell. Born on June 2, 1949, in Los Angeles, California, Michael O'Farrell, known simply as Irish, seemed destined for a life built around motorcycles and rebellion. His outlaw path began with the Night Riders Motorcycle Club based in Glendale. It didn't take long for his name to attract headlines. In August 1972, O'Farrell and several other Night Riders were convicted for the violent assault of a 15-year-old girl, a crime that marked his first major conviction and solidified his reputation on the streets. Shortly after, the Night Riders were absorbed into the Hells Angels during a bloody rivalry with the Vagos Motorcycle Club. This merger helped establish the Los Angeles County chapter of the Hells Angels. O'Farrell quickly rose through the ranks, earning a reputation for violence and fearless leadership. By the late 1970s, he had joined the Oakland chapter, the unofficial nerve center of the Hells Angels empire. While incarcerated in San Quentin, O'Farrell requested a formal transfer to the Oakland chapter. Though initially denied, his request was granted upon release, and he quickly made his presence felt. One particularly violent incident cemented his reputation. O'Farrell got into a brawl with Vincent "Big Vinny" Girolamo, the sergeant-at-arms of the New York chapter. O'Farrell beat Girolamo so severely that he later died from a ruptured spleen, an act that added to... In the early 1980s, while iconic club leader Sonny Barger was recovering from throat cancer surgery, O'Farrell took over as acting president of the Oakland chapter. Despite increasing pressure from law enforcement, he publicly denied any involvement between the Hells Angels and organized crime. The authorities, however, remained unconvinced. By 1987, Operation Rough Rider had gathered enough evidence to bring down several major figures within the club, including O'Farrell and Barger. Both were arrested alongside 11 other members on charges ranging from drug trafficking and weapons possession to explosives violations and conspiracy. The operation was aided by Anthony Tate, a key informant who had infiltrated the organization, revealing a sophisticated criminal enterprise beneath the image of leather jackets and Harley-Davidsons. In 1988, O'Farrell was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 3.5 years in federal prison. But before he could report to serve his time, tragedy struck. On June 6, 1989, O'Farrell was ambushed and murdered. He was stabbed multiple times and shot 4 times by a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. The killing was believed to be part of a violent turf war between the Aryan Brotherhood and the Hells Angels in California's East Bay. His funeral was a massive event. Over 1,000 mourners attended, including his wife and son. All gathered to pay their respects to a man both feared and respected within outlaw circles. 2 Aryan Brotherhood members, Aaron Jerry Marsh and Michael Bruce Tank Shepard, were arrested for O'Farrell's murder. Marsh was later strangled to death in prison, while Shepard took his own life in his cell. And then came Dwight Mushy Mushahid, also known as Big D. Born in 1968 in Winnipeg, Canada, Dwight Mushahid, nicknamed Mushy or Big D, was a larger-than-life figure with a dangerous edge. Of Iranian and Filipino descent, he stood an imposing 6 feet 3 inches tall and held a second-degree black belt in Taekwondo. Though he dabbled in professional kickboxing and boxing, it was not the ring where he made his mark. It was the criminal underworld. His first conviction came from methamphetamine distribution in Winnipeg, launching him into a long and calculated career in organized crime. Journalist Peter Edwards described Mushi as a charismatic yet lethal personality, someone who modeled himself after Sonny Crockett from Miami Vice, sharp Italian suits, sleek style, and a menacing presence to match. Unlike many outlaw figures surrounded by myth and exaggeration, Mushi's reputation for violence was grounded in reality. Rumors swirled that he had worked as a contract killer for the Rudo crime family, operating between Montreal and New York. Despite his deep criminal associations, Mushi maintained a respectable public image. He owned a home in Winnipeg's affluent River Heights neighborhood and led a tight-knit crew with discipline and authority. He was also suspected of smuggling methamphetamine from Ontario into Manitoba, expanding his influence as a significant player in Canada's organized crime landscape. According to journalist Anita Arvast, Mushi wasn't a mere street-level enforcer. He was refined, athletic, and ruthlessly strategic. His long dark hair, typically tied in a ponytail, understated wire-rimmed glasses, and composed demeanor gave him the appearance of a man not to be underestimated. His personal life was just as complex as his public one. One of his closest associates was Morello Fatas Aravana, an MMA fighter who would later play a central role in one of the most notorious events linked to Mushi, the Shedden Massacre, also known as the Bandidos Massacre. A brotherhood turns on itself. In April 2006, Canada was rocked by one of the most gruesome mass killings in its organized crime history. 8 members of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club were executed at a rural farmhouse in Shedden, Ontario. At the center of the carnage stood a man feared even among hardened criminals, Dwight Big D Mushi. By then, Mushi was already well known in Winnipeg's criminal underworld. His reputation wasn't built on bluff or bravado. His violent record and background in martial arts made his threats real and his presence intimidating. While many outlaw bikers embellished their reputations, Mushi's skills and suspected work as a hitman gave his name real power. By early 2005, tensions had begun to rise within the Bandidos Club. Fractures, rivalries, and suspicions were pulling the group apart. At the same time, Mushi was expanding his reach. He had become co-owner of a Winnipeg nightclub and a strip club, and was recruited into the Winnipeg chapter of the Bandidos by its leader, Michael Sandham. From the beginning, Dwight Mushi Mushahid distrusted Michael Sandham, a man he would later mockingly refer to as Little Beaker, instead of using Sandham's preferred nickname, Taz. On June 25, 2005, Mushi accompanied Sandham to a secluded farmhouse near Iona Station, Ontario, where they were introduced to Wayne Celestine, a volatile, heavily armed man who would later become a central figure in one of Canada's worst mass killings. Their objective was to meet Giovanni Muscadere, the national president of the Bandidos Canada. However, tensions surfaced almost immediately. Muscadere denied their request for full charter status, citing unpaid dues and concerns about the Winnipeg crew's loyalty. To Mushi, it was a deliberate slight, a clear indication that the national leadership did not truly respect the Winnipeg chapter. A second meeting took place on November 26, 2000. He traveled to Vancouver and purchased a kilogram of cocaine, as well as ephedrine, a chemical used in meth production. This violated a standing order from Musketeer, who had banned meth dealings within the club. Mushy, along with Sandom and Celestine, saw profit and power in ignoring those rules. Around the same time, troubling information surfaced. A Winnipeg chapter member known only as JB presented Mushy with a news article alleging that Sandom had once been a police officer, a serious offense in outlaw biker culture, where any law enforcement ties are considered unforgivable. Mushy, however, dismissed the claim, either out of denial or because he believed it was a case of mistaken identity. In March 2006, Mushy and Sandom traveled together to Peace Arch Park, a neutral area that straddles the US-Canada border. The park was often used for secret cross-border meetings, particularly by bikers with criminal records that prevented them from legally entering the United States. The objective was to repair relations with the American Bandidos leadership. But the effort failed. The rift between the Winnipeg chapter and the national leadership had become irreparable. Prelude to mass murder. On March 25, 2006, the plan for a violent coup was finalized. At a meeting held at Mushy's home, Sandom announced that he, Mushy, and 3 others would travel to Ontario to pull the patches of the No Surrender crew, Giovanni Musketeer's faction. In outlaw biker terms, removing someone's patch can mean expulsion or death. Uncharacteristically, Mushy remained quiet during the meeting. Something had changed. Upon arrival at Celestine's rural farmhouse, it became clear that he had not been informed they were coming. Nevertheless, he welcomed them. The stage was set. On April 1, 2006, the group made a public appearance at the Holland House restaurant in Iona Station. According to the restaurant's owner, Mushy was the clear leader, calm, composed, and paying the bill. In contrast, Celestine's bodyguard, Frank Mather, appeared nervous and tense. The Shedden Massacre. April 7, 2006. A mandatory church meeting was called for all members at Celestine's farm. The No Surrender crew, unaware of what awaited them, complied. Inside the farmhouse, weapons were being prepared. Sandom selected a .303 Lee Enfield rifle. Mushy modified a shotgun, sawing off its barrel in Celestine's garage to make it more deadly at close range, a clear indication that the violence was planned in advance. He wore surgical gloves underneath leather gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. And 5 others loyal to the No Surrender crew. Their bodies were later found crammed into abandoned vehicles in a farmer's field near the town of Shedden. A calculated betrayal. As darkness fell, Mushy stood beside Celestine, armed and ready. By 10 p.m., the No Surrender crew arrived at the barn, thinking it was a routine club meeting. It was a trap. Sandom fired the first shot, killing Luis Raposo. Chaos broke out. Mushy stormed into the barn, wielding the sawed-off shotgun. As panic spread, George Crash Kriarakis and Paul Sinopoli attempted to escape, only to be shot by Celestine outside. With the group subdued, Celestine ordered Mushy to stand guard over the remaining men. Though armed, Mushy didn't interfere, as one by one, Celestine executed the remaining hostages. In a haunting moment, Frank the Bammer Salerno reportedly shook Mushy's hand and begged him to think of his newborn son, Mario. But Mushy remained unmoved. The final victim was Jamie Goldberg Flans. Sandom attempted to shoot him, but botched the execution. Flans lay in pain. Mushy tested Sandom's weapon, confirmed it was working, and then calmly executed Flans with a single shot to the head. The escape and aftermath. In the early hours of April 8th, Mushi and Sandom fled in a stolen Pontiac Grand Prix taken from one of the victims. The bodies were left behind in abandoned vehicles near Shedden. Before leaving, Mushi mocked Sandom's failure to properly execute Flans. One witness later claimed Mushi commented that Head & Shoulders shampoo worked well for removing gunshot residue, an eerie reflection of his calculated, cold demeanor. What made Mushi's involvement even more brazen was that he was already out on bail for a methamphetamine conspiracy. One of his bail conditions was to inform authorities if he left Manitoba. Mushi did just that. He notified law enforcement of his trip to Ontario, but said nothing about its deadly purpose. When the bodies were discovered, Mushi quickly became a prime suspect. The informant. His downfall came from within. A fellow Winnipeg Bandido, known only as MH, had been secretly working with police. Equipped with a wire, MH recorded conversations that would ultimately seal Mushi's fate. He had been wearing a wire. On April 14th, just a week after the massacre, MH agreed to fully cooperate with police as an informant. His recordings and testimony would ultimately seal Mushi's fate. By May 7th, MH was officially designated as an agent informer. The tapes he provided captured Mushi expressing open contempt for. In an unusual twist, Sandom began impersonating Mushi in emails, writing in the third person to praise himself in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to elevate his image. Mushi was disgusted by the behavior. MH continued to record their conversations. In one of them, Mushi dismissed Sandom's claims of participating in the executions, saying, "He's probably claiming all the glory." When speaking about Muscadere's death, Mushi made a remark that sounded oddly respectful. This guy, he went out like a man. By June 2006, Mushi had grown increasingly vocal. On June 13th, when MH suggested that Sandom was creating an alibi at the group's expense, Mushi replied, "If he did that, he's an idiot. The three of us should go talk to him." But 2 days later, he never got the chance. On June 15th, Mushi was arrested at his home and charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. Authorities later revealed they believed he was planning additional killings, prompting an urgent arrest. Justice and the Code. At his 2009 trial, Mushi made no effort to hide his disdain for co-conspirator Wayne Celestine. Reports claimed Mushi had assaulted Celestine in jail, punishing him for being caught so easily. He continued to taunt Celestine during the trial. At one point, Celestine's lawyer alleged that Mushi pressed a threatening note against the glass separating their cells, which read, "You're a dead man." Mushi's defense attorney, Michael Moon, tried to portray his client as a reluctant participant, even arguing that Mushi had to take heart medication during the killings to prevent a heart attack. But few believed this defense. As journalist Peter Edwards noted, it was difficult to imagine the stoic and calculated Mushi as someone acting under pressure or fear. Just before the trial concluded, Mushi dismissed his lawyer Michael Moon and fellow accused Marcello Aravena. The Outlaw Biker Code was clear: never cooperate with authorities. Moon's legal strategy, blaming Celestine and Sandom, risked portraying Mushi as disloyal. In response, Mushi chose to represent himself in court. The verdict and legacy. On October 29, 2009, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty on all 7 counts of first-degree murder. As he was led away, Mushi bowed politely to the jury. a gesture that could be interpreted as a final sign of respect, sarcasm, or defiance. Today, Dwight Big D Mushy is serving a life sentence at Stony Mountain Penitentiary in Manitoba, with no possibility of parole. His name remains permanently tied to one of Canada's darkest criminal episodes, a massacre that revealed the violent, fractured world of outlaw biker culture.